My sister fired me in front of the board. I didn't raise my voice. Monica smiled for the room, hands folded like a news anchor. She said my role was being eliminated as part of a strategic streamlining. The legal counsel slid a neat packet across the table. Someone cleared his throat. Someone else studied his coffee as if it were a microscope slide. I watched the faces I had fed for 12 years, numbers, margins, predictability, turn into portraits in a museum I no longer owned. Their eyes stayed on Monica. Mine stayed on the clock. The second hand made a tiny click every time it judged me. She finished with a line she'd rehearsed. "We appreciate Aaron's contributions." The board chair nodded like a metronome. My father, Patrick, sat still, his jaw set, his tie too tight. He didn't look at me. That told me more than any speech. I signed the separation paperwork with a steady hand. The HR director slid over a cardboard box as if I might start packing mid-sentence. Monica added a final instruction, soft and ceremonial: keys and badge by tomorrow. I told her she'd have them today. I didn't blink. I didn't give her the pleasure. The door closed behind me with a hush that felt like snow. In the hallway, the carpet swallowed my footsteps. 2 interns avoided my eyes. I walked back to my office, set the box down, and sat in the chair I had earned one 12-hour day at a time. The awards on my shelf were heavy and suddenly ridiculous. Sales growth. Operational excellence. Client retention. Little gold rectangles that never once returned a phone call at 2 a.m. I lifted a frame, then put it back. Then I opened the bottom drawer, the one with the keyhole. The key lived under a strip of tape inside my wallet. It clicked into the lock with the softest affirmation. Inside sat a worn black portfolio, edges frayed from quiet use. I laid it on the desk, opened it, and saw the thing Monica had never bothered to read: ED Strategic Partners, LLC. For years earlier, when the succession whispers began and my father's compliments formed a halo around Monica's head, I hired a lawyer and built myself a seatbelt. On paper, it was a consulting firm for complex logistics programs. In practice, it became the signature on every major client agreement I negotiated. Riley and Moss, our family company, was named the service provider. ED Strategic Partners was the counterparty. I had never lied about it. I had simply stopped explaining what no one wanted to hear. I heard heels in the hallway. Sophie stepped in, eyes red from holding it together. She closed the door with her hip and pressed a hand to her chest. "Is it true?" she asked, voice low. I told her it was. I told her I was out. I also told her we were not done. I turned the portfolio toward her. She read the letterhead. Her shoulders loosened. "Wait," she whispered, catching on, "the contracts belong to my firm," I said. "Riley and Moss fulfills. I manage. That hasn't changed." Sophie sank into the chair across from me, then smiled in disbelief. I felt the air return to the room. It wasn't triumph. It was oxygen. My phone buzzed with an email from a client I knew by ringtone alone: Summit Freight Network. The subject line read, "Leadership change?" I didn't open it yet. Instead, I called Dana, my attorney, and left a message in our shorthand: activation. Today. I pulled a yellow pad from the drawer and started a list. Alternate warehouses. Temporary control center. Data migration. Routing agreements we could sign by close of business. I wrote in bullets, not sentences. The plan didn't need romance, it needed velocity. The building hummed with the bored energy of a Thursday afternoon. I had no interest in dramatics. I wiped my desk with a tissue and found, under a stack of vendor scorecards, a note I'd written months ago during a late-night audit: "We own trust. They own buildings." It was a reminder, not a threat. I packed the photos last. One of them was from the year we turned the company around, Monica on stage, presenting the numbers I had wrestled to the ground. I didn't frame resentment around it. I slipped it face down into the box. If she needed an audience that badly, she could keep that version of me too. I sent Sophie to book a small co-working room across town, just for the afternoon. For hours, a table, Wi-Fi, a door that closed. I told her to bring a charger, a sweater, and the patience of a nurse. She nodded like a soldier who finally received orders that made sense. As I shut off the office light, I pictured the boardroom, the staged compassion, my father's silence, and the last line of the memo HR had slid to me: "We wish you continued success." I accepted the wish. I intended to collect on it. In the elevator, a junior analyst asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine. He said he'd heard it was just a restructuring. I said restructuring is a pretty word for hunger. By the time I reached the street, the wind had picked up. Denver has a way of telling you when a front is moving in. I stood there for a moment, portfolio under my arm, and let the cold clear my head. What happens when the wrong person thinks they own your work? Do you rage, or do you rearrange the map? I crossed the street and headed for my car. The first call I placed was to Karen Lowe at Summit. The second was to Alex Rivera. The third was to a warehouse in Cheyenne I'd kept warm for exactly this day. One more call would go to Monica, not a conversation, just a courtesy: read the headers on the contracts. The box slid onto the passenger seat with a soft thud. I turned the key, felt the engine catch, and exhaled. Tomorrow would belong to emails and lawyers and 100 small fires. Tonight belonged to a locked drawer that finally did its job. Some people need applause to feel real. I need a signed agreement and a clock I can trust. And right now, the second hand was on my side. The boardroom wasn't where this started. It started at our dinner table. Patrick liked to turn Sunday pasta into a seminar on leadership. He called it presence. He'd tell Monica she had the room the minute she walked in. Then he'd turn to me and remind me that numbers don't smile back. I learned to wear calm like a uniform. I learned to let the room come to me. At work, I built routes the way surgeons build routines, precisely, quietly, until the bleeding stopped. I negotiated lane by lane, warehouse by warehouse. I fixed broken handoffs with whiteboard markers and stubborn patience. Monica did investor breakfasts and charity galas. She glowed. I shipped. Here's a snapshot. Year 6. A snowstorm locked 3 states. Our flagship account was about to miss a military deadline. I rerouted through Cheyenne using a sleepy crossdock nobody remembered, begged a night shift to wake up a forklift, and pushed freight into the dawn. The client called me a miracle worker. 30 days later, Monica presented the win at a conference. The slide deck sparkled. Patrick leaned over and whispered that she had it. I nodded, because arguing with tradition is like arguing with weather. Whispers of his retirement came like rumors about a storm forming offshore. Harmless at first, then everywhere. I felt the ground tilt. That's when I met Dana Chu for coffee at a hotel where no one in logistics ever bothers to linger. We didn't talk about revenge. We talked about continuity and risk. What happens if the person holding the map is told to sit down? Dana's advice was simple, almost boring. Create a consulting entity that contracts for strategic programs. Let Riley and Moss be the fulfillment partner. Keep it transparent. Use it for complex accounts that need a steady hand and flexible billing. Put my name where continuity matters, not as vanity, but as a promise. Her phrase stuck with me: seatbelt, not spite. So I formed ED Strategic Partners, LLC. Paperwork is not poetry, but it can be power. We filed. We drafted language that made sense to any honest adult. ED Strategic Partners will manage program design, vendor coordination, and performance oversight. Riley and Moss will execute warehousing and line haul. We added a simple continuity clause: if ED's named program lead is removed or reassigned without client consent, the client may renegotiate or terminate. No drama. Just daylight. I didn't sneak it past anyone. Every contract went through legal. Every board packet included the margins we earned under the model. The profits made the room generous. Directors nodded. Patrick congratulated Monica for structuring smart deals. I looked at Dana later and laughed without humor. She squeezed my hand and said, "Let the paperwork work." One by one, our biggest accounts chose the structure because it fit how they trusted us. They trusted me to steer, and they trusted Riley and Moss to carry. Summit Freight signed first. Horizon Supply followed. A third, then a fourth. With each signature, the line between face and engine became literal ink. Did I plan to use it as leverage? No. I planned to build a company that couldn't be erased by a mood. Then came the succession decision. Patrick gathered us in his office with the family photos and the expensive quiet. He spoke like a judge reading a verdict. Monica would be CEO. He said I was operationally brilliant, but too granular for the top job. He meant I wasn't a politician. He wasn't wrong. I felt the heat rise, then pass. I asked for clear authority over the programs I'd built. He said we'd figure it out. We never did. I drove home that night with the radio off. The steering wheel felt cold and honest. I called Dana from the garage and told her we were moving the last 2 strategic accounts under ED's umbrella. Not to punish anyone. To finish what we started. I slept badly and woke up steady. Years blurred into quarters. Monica's speeches stayed glossy. My spreadsheets stayed brutal. The numbers didn't care who smiled. The contracts didn't either. They just waited in their folders like parachutes packed by a careful hand. If you're asking whether I warned Monica, I did, in the only language that mattered. I sent summaries before board meetings describing the structure, the risks, the renewal timelines. I highlighted the continuity clauses. She thanked me for being thorough. Thorough is what people call you when they don't want to admit you're saving them. The family theater got louder as Patrick aged. He adored her polish. He tolerated my insistence on changing old processes that bled money. We tried to be gracious. We failed more than we admit. Sisters can love each other and still run on different fuel. The day I realized the seatbelt might become a lifeline was quiet. A client asked what would happen if leadership changed. I walked them through the clause, plain and clean. They nodded. They said that's why they signed with me. I went back to my office and wrote 6 words on a sticky note. Trust is the asset. Protect it. I tucked it under my keyboard. By the time HR drafted my separation packet, the scaffolding was already in the walls. ED's strategic partners wasn't a shell or a threat. It was a structure around a simple truth. People don't buy trucks, they buy sleep. They buy the promise that someone will answer at 2 a.m. and mean it. Was it paranoia or preparation? Call it whatever helps you sleep. I call it learning from a father who built a company with a clipboard and a stubborn streak, and from a sister who could light up a room while I kept the lights on. The night before the board fired me, I checked renewal clocks, flagged auto-termination windows, and reviewed every client's consent language. Nothing sneaky. Just ready. When Monica read her script the next day, she thought she was closing a door. She didn't look down at the hinges. Tomorrow, the clauses would wake up. The phones would ring. And the fog that kept Monica golden and me granular would finally burn off under fluorescent light. The building still smelled like cheap coffee when I unlocked my door. I packed in silence. Awards. Binders. A pen that never ran dry. The cardboard box rasped against the desk like sandpaper. I told myself to move slowly. Fast looks guilty. Calm looks in charge. At 7:12, my phone lit up. Karen Lowe, Summit Freight Network. No greeting, just a steady voice that had paid for truth 100 times. She said an email from Monica claimed leadership transition and named a new point of contact. Karen asked why she wasn't told yesterday. I told her the headline, Monica is CEO. Then I stopped talking. Karen did not. She said her contract was with ED Strategic Partners and named me as program lead. She reminded me of the continuity clause we had walked through twice. She said she would not be transferred like a file. I heard a printer in her office kick on, like a drum roll. She was printing my contract. I kept my tone even. I told her service would continue uninterrupted through ED Strategic Partners. I laid out the temporary route plan I'd sketched the night before. Cheyenne Crossdock warmed up, 2 overflow warehouses, a safety lane through Utah. Karen exhaled. She said she'd inform her team that all communication would go through me. Then she added a line that drew blood without raising her voice. If Riley and Moss pushed, Summit would pause their freight until our clause was respected. I hung up and called Dana. I summarized the call, bullet points only. She said to log everything, redirect politely, and attach the contract headers to every reply. No insults. No heat. Just paper. She texted me a 1-sentence script. Per the governing agreement, all program decisions route through ED Strategic Partners. It read like a lamppost. The second call came 5 minutes later, Logan Price at Horizon Supply Partners. He had received the same Monica email. He laughed once, short and annoyed, and said he'd already told his team that the continuity clause meant me, not press releases. He asked about capacity this week. I gave him numbers by lane. He said good, he'd hold Monica's team off his floor. I kept packing between calls. Photo frames. Cables. A stray charger. Sophie slid in with 2 coffees and a look that said she'd slept like a guard dog. She checked the inbox and winced. A reply-all storm was building. Monica had blanketed our big clients with a transition note. Replies were coming back fast and cold. 3 of them referenced Section 2. 1 by number. 1 used the word breach. By 8:05, the CFO pinged me with a polite "Can we chat?" I ignored it. I didn't work here anymore. Instead, I forwarded Dana the threads and added a clean, unemotional note, redirecting per contract. I attached the PDF headers with ED Strategic Partners sitting at the top like a street sign everyone had walked past for 4 years. My desk phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. The screen showed Executive Monica. The second ring was my cell. I answered. Her voice was bright and brittle. She asked me what I thought I was doing. I said I was honoring contracts the board had approved. She said I was confusing people and hoarding files. I told her the files were on the shared server under Programs, Active EDSB. I asked her to read the first page of any agreement. She said she didn't appreciate my tone. I said tone doesn't change signatures. Silence. I could hear the boardroom air conditioner through her end of the line. Then she accused me of orchestrating the timing. I told her to look at yesterday's minutes and the separation packet timestamp. She fired me first. The clauses moved second. Cause and effect. She hung up without a goodbye. Micro moments became a pattern. A national retailer's director refused a handoff call with Monica's team. A chemical supplier quoted the consent language back to me by heart. One client wrote, "Trust attaches to Aaron. Adjust accordingly." I felt something unclench in my chest. Not victory. Alignment. At 9:30, Alex Rivera texted, "Ops floor is nervous. Lots of questions. You okay?" I typed back, "I'm fine. Focus on service levels today." He replied with a photo of whiteboards covered in red arrows. Then a second text, "Monica wants an all-hands reset at noon." I put the phone face down. Noise wasn't my problem anymore, execution was. Sophie stood by the door like a bouncer. She asked if we needed a courier for hard copies. I nodded. She called one. I printed the highlighted clause packets for Summit and Horizon and slid them into bright folders. I wrote a single word on each in thick marker, continuity. When law is clear, you don't need adjectives. An email from a board director hit my inbox, careful and bland. He asked for context on account structures. I answered with 3 bullets and 4 attachments. No color commentary. If a man wants to pretend he didn't read what he approved, you let the attachments talk. By late morning, the building's friendliness wore thin. Security deactivated my badge without warning. I smiled and kept packing. Sophie handled the door. Clients kept calling my cell. The freight world doesn't care about your family drama. It wants to know where the trucks are. Then the subject line I expected finally arrived from Monica. Emergency board session. Attendance required. I responded with a single sentence. Please direct all inquiries to counsel. I am no longer an employee. I CC'd Dana. 30 seconds later, my phone rang again. Monica. I answered on speaker, set the handset down, and watched Sophie's eyes while my sister demanded I show up, demanded my cooperation, demanded a favor she wouldn't name. I took a breath, leveled my voice, and gave her the last free advice I planned to offer. Read the first line of every contract header. Then read who holds consent. Then decide if you want a fight or a partner. Would you have done the same? She didn't reply. I could hear paper moving, the edge of panic catching up to posture. I ended the call and slid the last folder into the box. The clock on my wall ticked once, clean and loud. Noon was coming. So was something else. Sophie walked in carrying a box that wasn't mine. Her blazer was buttoned, her eyes steady. She set the box beside my door, placed a single-page letter on my desk, and said she'd given HR 2 weeks' notice effective immediately. She was joining ED Strategic Partners today. Her voice didn't shake. Mine warmed for the first time all morning. We did not hug. We worked. She opened her laptop and pulled up a client grid we'd kept in our heads for years. I started dialing. One by one, the anchors confirmed what the clauses implied. Summit would stay with me. Horizon 2. A national retailer followed. A chemical supplier we'd rescued during a warehouse fire said they'd already told compliance they weren't moving an inch without my sign-off. I logged every call, every timestamp, every promise. At 11 accounts, I stopped and stared at the total column. 70% of Riley and Moss's revenue, poised to follow a portfolio the board never read past page 1. I didn't cheer. I breathed. If trust is a currency, the exchange rate had just spiked in my favor. I called 3 regional fulfillment centers like field hospitals. Cheyenne confirmed 5-night capacity with overflow space. A small operation outside Ogden agreed to take fragile freight if we sent our own QC. A warehouse in Pueblo offered weekend crews for rush loads at premium rates. We drafted short-term MOUs, 30 days rolling, service levels spelled out like instructions taped to an engine. Sophie color-coded the routes, pinned names to every shift lead, and labeled the folders in language even a panicked board member could follow. An email from the CFO arrived with careful italics, transition plan request. He asked for assistance, context, grace. I forwarded it to Dana and added one line, not an employee. Dana replied with a clean directive. She'd handle all board communication. I was to focus on continuity for our clients, not therapy for executives who enjoyed 4 years of record profits and selective vision. At 2 p.m., Alex Rivera texted me a photo of the operations floor. White bars, arrows, a circle around the word capacity. He said Monica was planning an all-hands reset, tone somewhere between pep talk and hostage video. Then he added a sentence that hummed, a large portion of ops would resign if I opened hiring. I asked him to keep his badge for now and keep service steady. I promised nothing and meant everything. Security tried to escort me out again when my badge failed at the printer. I smiled and handed them a stack of envelopes addressed to clients. They looked miserable, like ushers at the wrong funeral. I kept packing. The building felt colder by the hour, as if someone had opened every window to let image replace air. By late afternoon, the reply-all storm had turned into weather. Clients copied legal. Legal copied the board. In the middle of it, Monica sent a company-wide message about clarifying authority. The subject line wasn't the problem, the governance was. She still hadn't read a header. I sent one last internal note to the directors I trusted. Please see attached agreements approved by the board on. Continuity clauses highlighted. Nothing else. Adults can choose ignorance, but not after attachments. My phone buzzed so hard it skittered on the desk. Monica again. I answered. She sounded frayed, like silk pulled through a keyhole. She said there would be an emergency board meeting at 8 tomorrow morning and my attendance was mandatory. The word hung there like a typo in a legal brief. I told her I didn't work for Riley and Moss. I told her my counsel would attend if the board wished to discuss contract structures. I kept my voice even, but I let the steel show through. She accused me of betrayal, of weaponizing paperwork, of orchestrating a coup. I said she fired the person who held the client trust by name. Actions have consequences. Paperwork is just a mirror. She said our father was heartbroken. I said hearts rarely break over clauses. They break over disrespect that feels natural until it costs money. She tried a softer tone. It was almost convincing if you didn't know her tells. She asked for cooperation, for family, for the good of the company. I asked her to pick one, family or company. Cooperation requires honesty. Which did she want? Silence filled the line. I pictured her at the glass table in the executive suite, framed by the city she thought adored her. She finally said the board would not be pushed around. I told her I wasn't pushing. I was protecting agreements they signed and celebrated. Then I did the impolite thing. I ended the call first. Sophie watched me, patient as a metronome. I nodded. She already knew what came next. She had booked a private room at a co-working space for tomorrow, 4 desks, a door, Wi-Fi, a whiteboard, and a coffee machine that didn't judge. She slid a printed confirmation across my desk like a boarding pass. Check in at 6:30 a.m. Alex texted again at dusk. 2 team leads ready to jump, plus an analyst who kept our TMS from collapsing twice. He asked if we had payroll set up. We did. Strategic Partners wasn't a hobby. It had bones and a bank account. I called Karen at Summit and gave her the stopgap routing plan for the night shift. She promised to brief her floor managers and to keep legal on the leash unless someone at Riley and Moss did something reckless. Her breath settled. Mine followed. Then I sent quick voice notes to 3 other clients who respect brevity when trucks are rolling. No drama. Just details. Dana called as the sun slid behind the mountains. Her heels clicked through a quiet hallway. I could hear it. She told me the board had already looped her in. Her plan was simple. She would attend the morning meeting. I would not. She advised me to start the day with my team and act like a company that intends to survive. No victory laps, she said. Build. I stood, stretched, and looked at the empty shelves. The awards seemed lighter now, like props for a show that had closed. My father's last congratulations echoed in the carpet. Monica has presence. Presence doesn't move freight. Presence doesn't answer at 2 a.m. Presence doesn't keep promises when the wind screams over I-25 and a forklift won't start. What do you owe a company that insists you're replaceable while using your name as collateral? I carried the box to the elevator with Sophie at my side, then stepped into Denver's evening. The air was thin and honest. We walked to our cars without hurry. We had routes to lock, payroll to run, and a room to open at dawn. At 11:57 p.m. Monica sent a final message. See you at 8. Mandatory. I typed 2 words back to the board address and CC'd Dana. Council attending. The co-working space opened with a buzz and a sleepy nod from a clerk. Sophie flicked on the lights. The room smelled like new drywall and burnt espresso. I set the black portfolio on a cheap table, uncapped a marker, and drew 3 columns on the whiteboard. Clients. Capacity. Cash. The squeak cut through the morning like a starting gun. Today we act like a company, I said. My voice felt steadier than my hands. We were 4 people at Sunrise, me, Sophie, a dispatcher I trusted, and a junior analyst who knew our TMS better than his own sleep schedule. Titles could come later. Trucks would not. We opened laptops. I assigned lanes by initials, not departments. Cheyenne took the heavy, Ogden took the fragile, Pueblo caught the rush loads. We set a single rule for the day: no drama in emails, only facts. Then we pressed start on a countdown timer that would chime every 30 minutes. Microbriefs. No hero speeches. At 7:59, Dana texted, walking into the boardroom. I pictured the polished table, the expensive water, Monica's curated calm. Dana moved like a violinist tuning between storms, precise, unafraid. She didn't posture, she punctured. The coffee machine hissed when the first freight alert hit, a lane out of Greeley running hot. We rerouted in 3 clicks. Sophie called the Cheyenne crossdock to wake a forklift. I messaged 2 night shift supervisors whose spouses probably hated my ringtone. A fix, then a breath. The timer chimed. We checked the 3 columns again. Still standing. At 9:11, Dana called from a quiet hallway. Her voice carried the boardroom's smell, lemon polish, and late regret. Monica had opened with a speech about fiduciary duty and cooperation. A director complimented her tone. Then Dana set down the stack, the headers, the consent language, the renewal dates. She didn't accuse. She explained. She asked a simple question that landed like gravel. Who approved these contracts and cashed these profits? Silence. Papers moved. Someone coughed. A director admitted the board had eaten well for 4 years and slept better than they remembered sleeping before. Another pointed out that suing the author of those profits would sound brave only until a judge asked about the signatures. Monica tried to pivot to loyalty. Dana redirected to liability. It wasn't a duel. It was gravity. Back in the room, Our door rattled when a courier arrived with a stack of NDAs and emergency MOUs we'd drafted overnight. We signed as if our pens had fuel. Sophie scanned, labeled, and filed like a storm chaser. The timer chimed. Clients. Capacity. Cash. The columns still held. Dana's second call came at 10:32. Her heels clicked again. I could hear the tempo had changed. The board had dropped the litigation talk. A director had said, plainly, that wars are expensive when your enemy owns your customer's trust. The room shifted from blame to math. They wanted continuity. They wanted relief. They wanted me, without saying my name too loudly. Then Dana delivered the offer. Not a handshake, not a favor, a framework. Riley and Moss would engage ED Strategic Partners as primary strategic contractor for national programs. 4-year term. High 7-figure annual guarantee with performance incentives layering on top. Shared dashboards. Clear service levels. Monthly joint reviews. No gag orders. No humiliation clauses. The same people who watched me pack yesterday were ready to pay for the oxygen they'd been breathing. I stared at the whiteboard and felt both vindicated and tired. A win that still required work. The timer chimed. We checked the board. Clients had studied. Capacity was tight but green. Cash was cash, a thin line with plans scribbled around it. Do we take it? Sophie asked, eyes on the numbers, not the bruise. I wanted to say yes and sleep for a week. I wanted to say no and build my name with clean hands and quiet fury. Instead, I asked for 10 minutes and called Dana back. She laid it out clean. The offer wasn't love, it was leverage meeting reality. The board wasn't apologizing, it was preventing collapse. If we signed, we'd get runway. If we refused, we'd still grow, just with more risk and less cushion. She asked where I wanted the risk to live, in ego or execution. I closed my eyes and pictured my father's office, the framed degrees, the family photos, his tie pulled too tight whenever numbers turned unfriendly. He built a company with a clipboard and a crew that trusted his word. He also taught me, without meaning to, that image gets awards while execution pays vendors. Which one was I rewarding today? I opened my eyes and felt the weight land where it belonged, on the plan. I told Dana we welcomed the structure but needed clarity. The guarantee should scale with volumes, not freeze us into saving their margins at our expense. We needed joint control over vendor selection on contracted lanes, not ceremonial input. And if we were taking the hits for their operational stumbles, the incentives had to be real, not a marketing line. Dana hummed, approving. She said the board could stomach terms that sounded like adult supervision. She also warned me, Monica would paint any acceptance as a triumph of leadership. Could I live with that while we built something lasting? The timer chimed. Another microbrief. Horizon was steady. Summit had sent a note to both legal teams confirming they recognized ED Strategic Partners as their counterparty. Our junior analyst, who hadn't spoken in an hour, lifted his head and said he'd cleaned a data feed that used to crash every Thursday. A small miracle. The kind that keeps companies alive. At noon, I stepped to the whiteboard and added a fourth column, systems. Under it, I wrote 5 lines: order intake, carrier onboarding, exception handling, billing, reporting. No glamour. All backbone. We assigned owners with initials again. I told the room something I believed so deeply it felt like a prayer. We don't need to look big. We need to be reliable. My phone buzzed with a text from Alex. Half the ops team is ready to submit resumes if you're hiring. I told him we were, but we were hiring for discipline, not drama. He sent a thumbs up and a photo of a sandwich held over a keyboard. The work was still the work. Dana's third call came at 1:47. The board wanted to see terms in writing within 48 hours. She emphasized 2 details. First, a director had told Monica, in front of the room, that the contracts had been approved with her signature on the packet and that her argument about disloyal structuring would embarrass the company in court. Second, they wanted a press line about strengthening a long-standing partnership. Optics. Always optics. I scribbled numbers next to my columns and felt a question push through my ribcage. Was I building a bridge or a moat? Did I want Riley and Moss as a partner, a client, or a cautionary tale pinned to my wall? We sent Dana a bullet point counter within the hour. Scaled guarantees, meaningful incentives, joint governance on carrier selection, and a clean exit clause if consent got abused again. I added one sentence at the end that tasted like my own voice coming home. Respect is a service level. Sophie slid her chair back and finally exhaled. The room felt bigger. The floor felt like it belonged to us. The timer chimed again, then finally went silent. We had made it to afternoon without breaking. A message from Monica arrived at 3:22. Polite. Hollow. She thanked me for my cooperation during this transition and said she looked forward to a constructive partnership. I stared at the words and heard the boardroom air conditioner again. Then I wrote a reply so clean it almost shined. For counsel, we'll respond to the board's term sheet by Friday. Would you take the peace that pays or the pride that burns hotter? I locked the portfolio, wiped the whiteboard, and looked at our 4 columns. Clients. Capacity. Cash. Systems. The offer was on the table. The next move needed to be surgical. And Monica, for all her polish, had just learned how loud paper can be when it finally speaks. We built a company out of buzzers, takeout, and whiteboard dust. Days slid into each other like pallets on a fast belt. We turned the co-working room into a control center, then rented the office next door and knocked on the shared wall until it sounded like ours. Laptops hummed. Chargers tangled. Coffee tasted like courage poured too hot. Alex arrived with 3 ops leads and a dispatcher who could route with his eyes closed. No speeches, just sleeves. He took the hard boards, exception queues, carrier escalations, last-mile snarls, and started wiping the red off the map. Sophie owned onboarding, NDAs, background checks, the tiny rituals that make chaos look planned. I handled clients, cash, and anything that exploded. Nights were louder than days. The HVAC thumped like a slow heart. At 2:11 a.m., a lane out of Grand Junction blew a tire and a timeline. We swapped a carrier, reran the schedule, and only missed by 39 minutes. The client sent a terse noted. I saved it like a postcard from a place called Survive. By week 2, we had a living skeleton. Intake, dispatch, exception handling, billing, reporting. Not pretty. Strong. Our junior analyst duct-taped an EDI feed to a reporting dashboard. It didn't crash. I wanted to frame the code that held. Receivables were a drumbeat. We invoiced fast, collected faster, and watched the line of credit like a storm tracker. Dana reviewed our templates between negotiations, marking them with clean suggestions and mean little flags that saved us from future headaches. We were tired and precise. Tired keeps you honest when pride wants to improvise. The board's term sheet landed on a Monday at 5:42 p.m. It was long and polite. The guarantees were solid. The incentives were conservative. The governance was decorative. Monica's fingerprints were on the adjectives. The press language wanted strengthening a partnership, as if yesterday hadn't happened. I read it twice and felt the old heat, not rage, something colder. I wanted to answer the way pain answers, double the guarantee, force a public apology, carve a headline into stone. I said it out loud in a tone I didn't recognize, double the number, 6% equity, and a notice on their lobby wall. Dana let me run for 30 seconds, then leaned in with a sentence that reset the room. That's therapy, she said. What strategy? I stared at the draft and saw the truth hiding in the margins. Wars you've already won are the most expensive to keep fighting. Did I want to punish Monica, or build ED into the thing I kept drawing on napkins during flights? We took a walk around the block. Denver's air was all brass and grit. I counted streetlights to calm my head. When we came back, I crossed out my tantrum and wrote a counter that tasted like grown-up math, raise the annual guarantee by 20%, scale it with volume, not vanity. Keep the 6% equity stake, vesting over 4 years, performance-based, non-voting, with board observer rights tied to service levels. Add joint control over carrier selection on all contracted lanes. Real incentive ladders, paid monthly, not a bonus that disappears in December. Mutual non-disparagement. A neutral press line that says nothing while admitting everything. And one clause that mattered more than pride. If consent gets abused again, we walk clean in 30 days. Dana read it, eyes quiet. "This is a bridge," she said. "Not a victory lap." I nodded, then added one more line that was mine alone. Independent audit rights on any data we're judged against. If you're going to rate my performance, I get to see the meter. Sophie printed the draft and slid it into a folder like a fragile organ. "You sure about the equity?" she asked. I told her yes. Not for ego. For a lever when the room forgets who keeps the lights on. Equity isn't a trophy. It's a microphone. The fatigue began to move like weather through the team. I ordered everyone home at 9. They argued, then left, because people who are good at rescue are terrible at rest. I stayed, wrote thank you notes to 3 shift leads, and sent a note to Karen at Summit laying out the next month's capacity, like a calendar of small promises. She replied with a thumbs-up emoji and a sentence I saved, "You're the adult in the room." It wasn't flattery. It was a contract. Tuesday morning, Dana called with board noise. Monica had tried to sell our acceptance as proof of her leadership. A director asked about the signatures again. Gravity won again. The board wanted speed. They always want speed after ignoring the slow work that kept them safe. I agreed to one other thing I didn't enjoy: a private meeting with Monica. Neutral ground. A cafe where the barista spelled names wrong and nobody cared. I didn't want a scene. I wanted the air cleared enough to stop wasting oxygen. Sophie looked at me like a friend and a guard. "You sure?" she asked. "I'm sure," I said. "I want this done without poison." "Would you meet the person who broke your trust to secure the future you're building?" We hit send on the counter by noon. I watched the email leave like a ship I had carved with my teeth. Dana forwarded it to counsel with a subject line that could pass in a museum: revised business terms. Alex walked in with a box of cables and a grin that meant something had worked. The exception queue had dropped below single digits. He lifted his chin the way men do when they don't want to hug and said, "You buying lunch or sleep?" "Both," I said, and meant at least one. Late that night, the office settled. The lights from the parking lot cut lines across the whiteboard. I wrote 2 words I had never written for myself before: sustainable leverage. I underlined them until the marker squeaked. My phone buzzed once with my father's name, then stopped. No voicemail. Just a ghost of a habit. I put the phone face down and looked at tomorrow's calendar. 9 a.m. Cafe. Monica. Terms. Truth. I closed the portfolio, locked the drawer in a building that finally belonged to me, and listened to the HVAC thump once more. The system was holding. The counter was out. The past was on the schedule. The cafe smelled like burnt sugar and rain on hot pavement. I chose a table near the window, back to the wall, light on my hands. Monica arrived 3 minutes late, sunglasses still on, smile adjusted like a scarf. She sat without asking and placed her phone face down, screen pulsing under her palm. We ordered quickly. The barista spelled both names wrong. It felt accurate. Up close, the polish had hairline cracks. Concealer couldn't hide the night she'd carried. Her nails tapped the cup lid. I watched the rhythm. When she finally spoke, the words came smooth and practiced, like she'd rehearsed in the mirror over a sink full of cold water. She said I'd never trusted her. She said strategic partners proved I was always ready to pull the plug. The word always did the heavy lifting. I let it hang there between us, a stray thread daring me to tug. I answered the way you answer when you've practiced restraint for years. I told her trust is not a gift, it's an account balance. I reminded her of deals presented under her name while I handled freight at 2 a.m. I described the succession talk where our father said presence wins rooms and how presence doesn't answer when a lane collapses at midnight. I kept my voice level. She watched me like a juror. Her smile thinned. She said Patrick made her CEO because he understood people and he understood me. She said I'd always choose results over relationships. You're brilliant, she added, and unyielding. Compliment and charge, fused together like a double-edged key. I looked at the window. Denver's light can feel like judgment. I told her the contracts were a seatbelt, not a bomb. I told her I hadn't started a fire. She pulled the alarm when she fired the person the clients were paying to trust. My tone was steady. My hands were not. She flinched. Barely, but I saw it. Then she leaned in and lowered her voice, the way people do when they want to sound sincere without risking truth. She said I'd weaponized paperwork. I said I'd laminated promises. A couple laughed behind us. Silverware chimed. For a moment the whole city felt like background music to a conversation two girls should have had at 19 and never did. She asked if I understood the damage. I told her I understood the choice. You can pretend contracts are decoration, or you can admit they're bones. She called me clinical, cold, transactional. I said logistics is a love language where love sounds like, we'll make the truck. She blinked. Maybe she heard it. Maybe not. Her phone vibrated again. She didn't check it, which told me enough. The board had been busy since dawn. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need the form letter version of pressure to feel it. She shifted to family. The word landed like a plate set down too hard. She said Patrick was hurt. She said he'd asked what happened to his girls. She quoted him calling this a misunderstanding. The way she said misunderstanding almost made me laugh. Almost. I told her what I should have said years ago. Steady isn't silent, and loyalty isn't disappearing. I said I'd carried the margins because I was asked to. I said I'd taken the demotion in everything but title because I was told it was strategic. I said dignity had become my only hobby. She stared into her coffee and whispered that she had carried things too: investors' moods, the board's vanity, our father's pride. Her voice cracked, thin as ice. It was the first honest sound I'd heard from her all month. A micro-clarity cut through my anger. We were both drafted into the family story, just on different pages. She learned charm as armor. I learned systems as shelter. He rewarded one and tolerated the other, and called it balance. Would you forgive someone who confuses your boundaries with betrayal? She asked what happens next. It wasn't a power move, it was tired. I told her Dana had the counter on the table. I said the terms were fair and adult. I said if the board accepted, ED would deliver. We would pick carriers together, share dashboards, pay incentives that behaved like promises. And if consent was abused again, I would walk and not look back. Her jaw tightened on the last part. She asked if I'd come back inside, if the board offered a bigger title, a cleaner corridor. I told her offices don't fix gravity. She laughed once, painful and small, and said Patrick would hate hearing that. I asked her one favor that wasn't small. Stop writing to clients like they're ornaments. Write to them like they pay your rent. She winced but nodded. Or maybe it was just a blink. She reached for a memory, the way we both do when the present won't behave. She talked about a road trip at 15, a flat tire on I-70, how I stood with our father on the shoulder holding a flashlight while she kept our mother talking so no one panicked. I remembered my fingers going numb in the wind. I remembered learning the exact sound of a bolt giving up. Maybe we're still playing those parts, she said. You hold the light. I distract the dark. I shook my head. I learned to fix the wheel, I told her. You learned to keep the camera happy. For a second we smiled like sisters. Then the moment passed, as moments do when the bill arrives and the past remains due. She asked if I hated her. I said no. Hate takes energy I need for trucks and people who count on me. She asked if I'd ever trust her again. I didn't answer. Silence did the job better. I stood, paid, and left her the receipt because symbolism matters when words start lying. At the door, she called my name. I turned. She didn't ask me to stay. She asked if I was sure. I said I was sure of this. Respect is not a mood. Outside, the air felt newer than it had any right to be. The mountains cut the skyline like a signature. My phone buzzed with Dana's name, then Alex's, then Karen's. Decisions were moving. Trucks were moving. The city moved. Behind me, through the glass, Monica looked down at her hands the way someone looks at a map they've misread for years. I wanted to tell her how to rotate it. I didn't. Some directions you only learn by paying. When I reached the corner, the light changed without ceremony. I crossed with the crowd, hearing spoons clink, tires hiss, a bus sigh to a stop. Life continued its indifferent mercy. What do you call a truce that feels like stepping onto a bridge you built while drowning? I didn't look back. I had a contract to finish, a team to feed, and a future that preferred quiet. The door chime behind me rang once, bright and ordinary, and then the city swallowed it whole. For months later, a steel door hissed shut behind me. The air at Armitage Defense smelled like solder and fresh paint. Machines hummed in a disciplined way, like a marching band that never gets tired. Martin Cole, procurement, square shoulders, clear eyes, handed me a hard hat and walked me past rows of labeled crates that looked like promises with barcodes. He didn't waste words. He asked about chain of custody, surge capacity, and how we handle exceptions when a single missed scan can ripple through a battalion schedule. I answered with systems, not slogans. Our intake map. Our audit trail. Our no drama, only facts rule. I told him we design redundancy like seatbelts, not decorations. He nodded once, and I knew he heard the quiet in my voice. We paused at a glass-walled control room glowing blue with screens. Martin said the rumor mill had been loud. Riley and Moss almost tipped over. Denver couldn't stop talking, and yet our service levels held. He called it impressive. I called it necessary. He cracked a smile and slid a folder across a stainless table. Not a teaser. A contract. My hands were steady. The numbers were bigger than my old life had allowed me to dream out loud. With Armitage, our annual run rate would break 48 million, more than twice what I delivered inside Riley and Moss, without the family discount on my voice. My stomach did a slow, dangerous flip. I signed the intent page, then closed the folder like it might fly away if I blinked wrong. On the way out, Martin walked me past a row of flags and said something I didn't expect to feel: gratitude. They needed quiet operators, not headlines. He said they'd chosen us because we answered at 2 a.m. and because our paperwork read like we meant it. I shook his hand with the kind of grip you learn from a father who built with clipboards and willpower. Back at our renovated headquarters, concrete floors, plants we keep forgetting to water, a mural that looks accidental and isn't, the team buzzed like someone had turned the lights brighter. We'd named the small meeting rooms after our earliest believers: Summit, Horizon, Cheyenne. Alex stood under the whiteboard with a marker cap between his teeth, tracking lanes like weather systems. Sophie color-coded chaos into a calendar even my worst days could respect. He saw me before I spoke. "How was the tour?" he asked, eyes burning a little. "Clean," I said. "And real." I held up the folder. The room clapped exactly once and then returned to work, which is how I like my victories. Dana called before the coffee stopped steaming. Her voice had that courtroom calm. "It's done," she said. "They accepted the counter. Signed this morning." I closed my eyes and felt the floor shift, not like an earthquake, like a building settling after the last nail goes in. Riley and Moss had inked a 4-year deal naming ED Strategic Partners as their primary logistics partner. Scaled guarantees. Joint carrier selection. Monthly incentives with teeth. Independent audit rights. A clean 30-day walk if consent gets abused. Even the press line read like an adult wrote it. "Monica?" I asked, though I already knew. She agreed, Dana said. After 2 directors reminded her that the alternative was unkind. I sat on the edge of the conference table and let the mix hit me: relief, satisfaction, and a sadness I didn't invite but couldn't ignore. I had wanted freedom. I built it. Now freedom included a contract that kept my old house standing. Was that justice or maintenance? We gathered the team for 5 minutes. I told them what the partnership meant in human terms: predictable cash, room to hire, leverage to negotiate better lanes for everyone. Less whiplash. Fewer miracles. More routine that feels like dignity. They cheered softly, the way professionals do when the hallway finally stops moving. Sophie taped a printout of the press line near the coffee machine. "Strengthening a long-standing partnership," it said. The words were technically true and emotionally useless. She rolled her eyes and poured me tea instead of coffee. She knows when I need warmth without voltage. Logan from Horizon sent a 2-sentence note. "Looks like you threaded the needle. Keep my lanes green." Karen at Summit replied to our forecast with a thumbs up and, "We'll renew early if you want to bake this in." I saved both. Trust sounds like short emails. I walked the floor while the team returned to their screens. The new desks still smelled like cardboard. Our small server rack hummed like a secret. On a whiteboard, someone had written, "Don't look big. Be reliable." I underlined it once and felt steady. Would you accept a deal that saves your old house while building your own? Alex came over with a grin he couldn't hide. We did it, he said, and then softened. You did it. I shook my head. We're not done. He nodded. He knows my tells. Dana texted a photo of the signed signature page. Monica's name sat 6 lines above mine like the echo of a story I didn't believe anymore. I didn't hate her. I didn't trust her. Both can be true, and still the trucks must move. We kicked off a quiet sprint, onboarding protocols with Riley and Moss, joint dashboards, a schedule of carrier reviews that would feel like truth, not theater. I sent the team home by 9. I stayed and walked our narrow hallway twice, listening to the building exhale. The city outside the windows was a rectangle of lights. I pressed my palm to the glass and felt the cold climb into my skin, a reminder that choices have temperature. The deal would smooth our mornings and fatten our patience. It would also keep Monica in my calendar. The thought tasted like metal. As I packed up, my phone lit the room with an old name I hadn't seen all week, Patrick. No message. Just a calendar invite for lunch, a place he loves, the one with white tablecloths and too many forks. I stood there, holding the phone, reading the time and the address, and felt the past knock on a door I had locked on purpose. I didn't accept. I didn't decline. I slid the phone into my pocket and turned off the lights. Tomorrow, we'd move freight for both the company that raised me and the one I built to survive it. And over lunch, if I showed up, a father would ask for something expensive. The restaurant smelled like lemon peel and butter hitting hot pans. White tablecloths, quiet silver, the kind of place that forgives old men in expensive suits. Patrick stood as I walked in, slower than I remembered, shoulders rounding under a jacket that used to fit like armor. He kissed my cheek the way fathers do when they want to rewind time without admitting it. We didn't talk at first. China clicked. I sighed in water glasses. He asked about weather, traffic, the kind of small talk that pretends there isn't a tidal wave curled under the table. The waiter described specials like bedtime stories. I nodded at the first one he named and waited for the script to end. Patrick finally put his hands on the table, palms down, like he was studying a map. He said he'd mishandled the succession. He said, "I'm sorry," like the words had sand in them. Tradition, he explained, is a lens and a cage. He praised my results and admitted he had loved Monica's presence because investors love mirrors. His voice thinned on the last sentence. I listened without saving him. I drank water. I kept my face neutral and my breathing slow. He pushed on. The board was talking about restructuring again. They wanted their margins back without the weekly crisis calls. He said the room had shifted since our deal. Respect moves differently when the lights flicker. Then he told me what I had already sensed in the way his tie sat wrong. The board wanted me back as CEO of Riley and Moss. A clean reshuffle. Monica to branding and outreach, the public work she performs like a stage. Me to the engine room with a title that matched the responsibility I refused to drop. He said the vote would pass if I said yes. The room narrowed to the line of salt on the rim of my glass. I asked if Monica knew. He nodded. He said she'd agreed, grudgingly, on one condition, that we try to mend whatever this had become. Not through lawyers. Through. He searched for a word that wouldn't embarrass him. Conversation. Family. Grace. He looked older saying it. Our plates arrived, steam curling like script. I tasted nothing. I watched his eyes for the thing I had not seen in months, humility. It was there, flickering like a signal through fog. He said the company needed a steady hand with actual power. He said I had built that hand outside. He asked me to bring it home. Home. The word tasted like a room that never remembered my name. I asked about ED's strategic partners, about independence, about the contracts that had kept their world upright. Patrick said the board respected ED's performance and wanted the partnership intact. He said they would look at a structure that let me remain an owner while serving as CEO. He stumbled over the specifics and admitted he needed lawyers to make it lawful. He asked me to trust the intent, not the draft. Trust. Another word with teeth. I let him speak himself empty. He told me he'd watched the company drift into optics while I carried the air under it. He admitted he'd confused charm with leadership because charm thanked him on stage. He said leadership had been answering at 2 a.m. while his phone slept on a charger. His jaw trembled once. He pressed it still. I told him I would not be a prop. If I walked back in, I would have authority that felt like reality, not costume jewelry. I would set the lanes, the standards, the calendar for how the room learned to respect execution. No more glass doors framing someone else's monologue. He nodded. He said he understood. He might not, but he wanted to. I pictured my team's faces. Sophie's calm. Alex's tired grin. The junior analyst who made our data stand without training wheels. I pictured our concrete floors and the whiteboard with "Don't look big. Be reliable." The thought of trading that clean hum for committees and staged applause made my stomach turn. Would reclaiming the throne be growth or gravity dressed like grace? I asked Patrick the question that mattered more than titles. Would he protect the work if it made him uncomfortable? If I cut pet projects, trimmed showy waste, and made quiet decisions that saved money but bruised egos, would he sit on his hands and let me lead? He hesitated a beat too long and then said yes. I filed the pause where I keep my fireproof facts. He reached for my hand across the table and stopped, unsure of the bridge between us. He withdrew, then tried again with words. He told me a story I'd forgotten, the first year of the company, a winter where payroll hurt and his breath fogged in the warehouse while he begged a forklift to behave. He said he built Riley and Moss out of fear and bravado. He said I rebuilt it with systems and stubborn love. His eyes shone. He did not cry. Dalton men don't cry in public. They blink harder. We worked through dessert like two accountants splitting a memory. He asked what I needed to even consider yes. I spoke in sentences that felt like ribs. ED stays independent. Joint governance lives on paper, not on stage. Board support is written, not whispered. Monica's new role is real, not a punishment box designed to explode later. No surprises. No quiet sabotage. I wanted audits that proved truth. I wanted the freedom to keep ED's culture intact, even if my business card changed. Patrick nodded, though nodding is cheap. He said he'd push the board to codify the conditions. He said he'd talk to Monica about staying out of the engine unless invited. The old man in him flickered, wanting to command, then sat down and tried cooperation on like a new coat. We paid, a ritual that let him insist without me feeling bought. Outside, the wind slid between buildings and carried away whatever performance had clung to us inside. He hugged me, careful, as if I were made of glass, and he'd just noticed. Back at ED, the air smelled like warm plastic and good work. The Armitage folder sat on my desk, weighty and honest. Sophie looked up and read my face in 3 seconds. She asked if I was okay. I said I was, considering. She nodded like a friend who knows not to push a wound that's still mapping itself. I walked the floor and listened to our small chorus, keyboards, low voices, the soft clack of a stapler. Riley and Moss would give me a crown. ED had given me a spine. The choice hadn't arrived as a victory lap. It had walked in quietly and asked me who I wanted to be when no one was clapping. Night settled. I stood under the mural and let my pulse match the hum of the server rack. Being needed and being free are cousins who don't always share a language. Somewhere downtown, Monica was likely drafting a speech she didn't believe. Somewhere else, Patrick was convincing a board to trust the daughter he finally saw clearly. I locked the portfolio, turned off the lights, and left the question on my desk like a key I wasn't ready to pick up. If I said yes, I could save a house that once forgot my name. If I said no, I could keep building a home. The sign over our door glowed against a cold Denver sky. ED Strategic Partners. My name, my bones, my risk. I stood on the sidewalk and listened to the building breathe, vents humming, keys jingling, a laugh from the second floor. My breath fogged once, twice, like a metronome reminding me I was still here. Inside, the lobby smelled like cardboard and pine cleaner. 42 people worked under this roof now. We named rooms after our first Believers Summit, Horizon, Cheyenne. A junior analyst held the elevator for me and grinned the way people do when they're tired and proud at the same time. He said the Armitage feed had gone live without crashing. I told him that was music. On my desk, a folder from Martin Cole with the final signatures. Our annual run rate would clear 48 million with room to climb. Across the hall, a wall calendar inked with renewals and reviews. Riley and Moss sat on that calendar as a client, not a parent, not a stage. Our partnership was real now. The grown-up kind. Predictable cash. Joint dashboards. Audit rights that meant no one had to pretend. My phone buzzed with a new subject line from the board, Proposal CEO Transition Plan. The language was careful, the numbers solid. A path back inside. A crown if I wanted it. I felt the old heat rise, and then I let it cool on its own. Crowns are heavy. Maps are useful. I wrote a reply and didn't send it. Not yet. I walked the floor instead. Alex was bent over a whiteboard, erasing red arrows like a man shoveling snow. Sophie was onboarding 2 new dispatchers with her steady voice that makes chaos sit up straight. The room sounded like work, not theater. My chest loosened. Back at my desk, I opened a clean document. I wrote 3 sentences to the board that felt like my heartbeat lined up with a pen. I thanked them for the offer. I said ED would keep the partnership strong. I said I wasn't ready to trade ownership for apology, not today. I added one more line, a bridge I could live with. We could revisit the conversation in 6 months, after the systems we were building had roots deep enough to survive anyone's mood. I saved it. Not sent. Not yet. Choices deserve clean air. Evening tilted the windows into mirrors. I could see myself against the city, older than I admit, steadier than I expected. My father's name lit my phone. No speech this time. Just a text. I was wrong. Proud of you. I stared at it until the letters felt human. I typed thank you and pressed send. No lecture. No autopsy. Just a thread tied to something that might hold. A minute later, Monica's name appeared. 1 sentence. I'll write to the clients like they pay our rent. It wasn't an apology. It was something sturdier. I put the phone down. Silence did more than any reply I could manage. We held a quick stand-up near the loading dock, a silly little ritual we invented because beginnings deserve witnesses. I told the team what mattered. Armitage was live, KPIs were clean, and the deal with Riley and Moss meant fewer miracles and more sleep. We clapped once, not for me, for the work, and went back to our screens. I turned off the overheads and left the lamps on. The logo outside washed the dark with a soft, steady glow. I thought about my father's lunch, his careful apology, the board's offer, the way Monica looked down at her hands in that cafe like a map she'd finally started to rotate. I thought about the girl on the shoulder of I-70, holding a flashlight in the wind while the wheel came loose. She learned to fix what wobbled. She learned to stand still when everyone else performed. Would going back be healing or gravity dressed like grace? I opened the draft to the board again, read it out loud, and felt my voice land. I cut 1 adjective. I added 1 condition: ED's culture stays intact, even if my title changes later. Then I closed the laptop and left the email unsent. Tomorrow could hold its own choices. Tonight belonged to this room. On the way out, I looked up at our sign and understood something simple. Monica didn't push me out of a company, she pushed me into one. The betrayal had turned into a lever, then a scaffold, then a door I could open without asking permission. I locked up and stepped into the cold. The street was ordinary, tires hissing, a bus sighing to a stop, someone somewhere laughing at a joke I couldn't hear. My phone stayed quiet. The sky felt wider than a promotion. I didn't promise my father a return. I didn't burn the bridge either. I chose the thing that kept my hands clean and my trucks moving. I didn't take back the crown. I chose the map.